Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Single Malt Strategy. I'm your host, Jean, the strategy wargamer. I don't have Matt here for this particular interview. I am here with Nikola from Vetica. I'm going to screw this up, from Vetica Studios. Welcome, Nikola. How are you?
Very nice. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I got close, I think, to saying it correctly.
Yeah, don't worry. Also, I'm also apologizing in advance if I make some errors in English because it's not my native language. So I hope it'll be fine.
I appreciate you coming on the show, especially this early in the morning. I know you're located in Europe and very early, and I know you didn't get a lot of sleep.
Yeah. Well, we will handle it. I hope. It's as I said, it's a big day today. It's release day. So anyway, the adrenaline should work the job today.
Yeah, I know it's November 15th, the day we're recording this. So Armored Brigade is being published by Matrix Games today, and it's releasing worldwide. I know you're very excited about it. So one question that I have that I guess I can segue into is, how long has this game been in development?
Well, actually, the story starts about 14 years ago. That's when actually this project started 14 years ago as I can say some kind of a hobby project, and by Juha Kirkovsky, who is our main programmer and creator of the game. And around 2008, so 10 years ago, he decided to render it public. A small forum and the website was posted, and people started appreciating. Actually, that's the first core of the community started in like 10 years ago. And the game was free at the time. It was substantially, as I said, a hobby project until maybe 3 years ago, when we decided together with Juha to make it commercial, and that's how it ended up with the partnership with Matrix Games 2 years ago, and to this release day today, when the game became commercial. So it's a quite long story that goes for a decade substantially. That's why we wanted to release it this year, because it means like 10 years since the first public release, since the Armored Brigade is actually, let's say, online. Although the game is, of course, substantially different than 10 years ago.
Wow, that's a long development process. And how big is the team? How did you guys get all together?
Well, the team is currently four people. There is, and it's also international because we have like Juha. He is from Finland. I'm from Italy. We also have one guy from United States and another from Russia. And substantially, it was actually all part of the community of the freeware database. For example, I came around in autumn of 2011. I joined the game, started playing it, decided that I could contribute to the game, and each of us actually started in that way. We started working on the freeware database or game, of course, and at a certain point, we, as most important contributors, we decided that we were offered actually by Juha to take part of the team, and we joined the team, and we decided to make this commercial game. Wow. And actually, none of us is actually game developer. We never developed a game before. This is like the first time, and we also come from different really like different areas of specialities. For example, actually Juha is the programmer. He knows the stuff. Dima is artist in his real job. I'm working diplomacy. I'm not even in the game development. So it's a bit mixed bag, and that's the result, that we actually succeeded somehow to make this team, and it works quite good, I would say.
So, in terms of Armored Brigade, you were mentioning that there was a previous game that's it's open source.
Yeah, it has its own custom engine, and I can't say it's open source, but it does have a free database that anybody can edit, and you can customize, let's say, exterior factors like, for example, the maps and units and similar stuff. The contents are open substantially. The game in itself, it's not. Juha is the only guy who can actually added the game in a substantial way.
In regards to this game, where do you feel like the inspiration for this game came from? What kind of other projects, other games have inspired you guys to design this?
As I said, it actually started as a hobby project by Juha. He wanted to make a game for himself. In actually that's like for the first 4 years, stuff like that. And definitely there was some inspiration from the games that he and we played. Undoubtedly, there's like Steel Panthers. This is often being compared as real-time Steel Panthers. There is also combat mission, definitely, even close combat. But also some other games, for example, Arma as well, had some kind of influence. Of course, it's not that we really took all the games, just copied the features, of course. But those games definitely left a trace because those were the games that we were playing and still are playing while making and producing this game. So, for example, I discovered Armored Brigade because at the time I was playing close combat a lot. I think it was 2011, so I think it was a gateway to Khan, I think, when I was playing it, and I was not happy with, the limitation of the engine system at the time, which was like the AI was not aggressive enough. So I was searching for an alternative, and that's how I discovered Armored Brigade. It was some post in the community of the close combat that suggested let's try this freeware game, and I tried it, and I immediately felt that there was potential. And as I said, coming from the games that I played that were very similar to Armored Brigade in a certain way, I've immediately understood how to play the game. And that's actually, I think, that most players will find that there is at least some element that they're already familiar with from the other games, because, as I said, we are all gamers from the same category, and we just decided to make a game for ourselves substantially. And that's how you can feel those influences.
Trying to segue into getting into the map, because the map I feel in this game is very unique. I got a taste of playing the game the last few days, and it's unlike any other game that I've played. One thing that kind of stuck out to me a great deal was this map that you guys implemented, particularly the zoom feature. It kind of stands out mainly because you're going from like an entire, I would say, theater, like you could see the entire region of Germany and then zoom down all the way down to a single road or a single house. So my question would be, how difficult was it to implement this map and this incredible zoom feature that you guys put together?
Yeah, that is one of those features that took literally years to develop in a certain way, because, as I said, 10 years ago, there were no maps, real-time maps real maps in Armored Brigade. Back in the day, for example, it was a battle generator, for example. Every battle terrain was generated by computer randomly. Of course, it had many drawbacks. And then at a certain point, we decided that to try to import the satellite data in the game. And it took several years actually to perfect the technique to actually import satellite data and make workable maps. For example, like 5 years ago, that's more or less when we started doing that. First initial results were, to say at least, catastrophic in a certain way, because it was a mess of pixels. And especially since we have a game limitation, which is 30 by 30 meters grid, it's sometimes very hard to translate the real-time data in a game, because in those 30 by 30 meters, you have a lot of features. In the same tile, you can actually have, for example, just saying some bushes, some trees, a bridge or a house or a building. So we needed several years to perfect the map creation, how actually to create a map and make it look nice and also realistic in the same time. And this zoom feature, it's actually appeared maybe a year ago during the commercial edition. And it was actually more of a programming feat by Juha, who succeeded to make it quite flawlessly, because back in the day, as I said, it was not like that. Back in the day, you had several layers substantially, so you would click and it will zoom and zoom out, if you, how to say, like a sequence of images. And Juha had this brilliant idea to make it. He worked several days and he created it like flawlessly. So you can actually now zoom all the way from the big map, which is like 200 square kilometers, all the way down to a single tank on the battlefield without any kind of delay. And it took several years to perfect that, but we eventually succeeded. And the effect is, of course, as you can notice, that quite nice.
Yeah, I was really stunned by that. It's probably the best implementation of a map system of that scale. I've never seen it implemented in a game like that, and it's absolutely incredible. So my hat's off to you guys for doing that. That was, as I was playing, I was going back and forth, up and down, and I was just amazed at how smooth it was. One question I had in my head while I was playing it is, how big can you, I would say, there's an operational area that you could play the game, and then you can zoom out to an entire theater. Is it possible to kind of include like an entire that entire theater as the playground? Good example for the viewer or listener would be like, can we include stuff from like all the way a battlefield going from Berlin all the way to Hanover or to the border of possibly Belgium?
Well, let's say that like the maps in themselves are limited to 61 by 61 kilometer. It's not an engine limitation. Technically, I believe you can make it larger. And actually, one of the first, but it is the decision that we took for practical reasons. Substantially, I believe that is connected with the file size of the map, so it's much easier to manage if it's limited to 61 by 61. It's actually a question for a map creator, but substantially, I do remember that we used to have a Northern German plan, which was substantially quite larger than the maps that we have right now. But then we decided there's also some issues. For example, when you select the map of that size, several hundred kilometers, substantially what you see on the screen is not readable. When you have this small zoom feature, when you're flying above the map, and you also have this small zoom that show you more details of the map. Substantially, if you have a map that large, it's not really practical. So we decided to, as I said, for practical reasons, decided to limit the map size to 61 by 61, which is only arbitrary decision in a certain way. Technically, it's not a limitation. And on that 61 by 61 kilometer major map, and we have several of those, and technically that's the plan, possibly that one day we will have the whole Germany in several maps, smaller maps. You can also select a battlefield which is at maximum 15 by 15 kilometers. And that's more or less the size in which you can put a whole battalion or regiment and play the game, of course. And the smallest map that you can play is about less than 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers. It's 1,900 meters size. That's the smallest one, and I will stress that because some of the people from for example, close combat was asking for the smallest possible map on which they could play. And that's more or less the same, the smallest size. And it's quite small in the games of the Armored Brigade, because that's very peculiar for the Cold War. The range of the weapon systems is not what you usually see in other games, like in close combat, which is very, as the name imply, close combat. In Armored Brigade, you literally have systems that can kill you from like 5 kilometers away. Missiles, tank guns, whatever. And that is also translated in the map sizes that we are forced to use, because we have to reflect accurately how the combat would have eventually happened in those years actually in Europe. So that's how we model the things.
You mentioned the Cold War. This is a Cold War game. So the question that I have is, why the Cold War, not World War II, or any other conflict? What inspired you guys to make a Cold War level game?
Well, I guess there's also some. There's a plenty of games that cover World War II and the modern era, and there are very few games that simulate Cold War. Particularly if you take into consideration that actually, if games are simulators or historically accurate, then the list is even shorter. And yeah, that's I think the main reason for which we selected the Cold War, because it's a very interesting period. You have everything ranging from, as I said, from 65 to 91. And this choice is not, we have selected those years particularly because that's when Cold War was more of a conventional hypothetical conflict than nuclear one. Because up to the 60, 66, 67, all major combatants actually just plan to nuke the other side to oblivion. So, yeah, simulating a game like that was not really would have not been very interesting. So that's why we concentrated our forces more on this later stage of the Cold War. I mean, later, middle to late range. And as I said, if you play the game in the 65, you will feel it's significantly different than the game you're playing in the 80s. The range, there are a lot of units that are from the World War II. You can find those in the game as well, surviving into the 65, especially in the case of the Finland, but there will be some future factions that will include even more World War II equipment. And you will see the tanks have a lower range. They cannot fire as accurately at the longer ranges, and technology in itself changed. And then you move to the 80s, and you have all of those fancy tanks and whistles and bells, the laser rangefinders, the 3-4 kilometer range weapons and missiles that were maybe not available in the 60s and the early 70s. And we decided for this reason because it gives us a lot of flexibility, and also it's not covered because I think we are one of the few unique games that cover this these scenarios, but especially in this highly accurate historically point of view.
You mentioned having all these decades to pick from, and this game is going to involve NATO and Warsaw Pact forces. So how will the game handle having the player command air and ground forces from numerous nations from around the world?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that we are not planning like several factions on the same map. I mean, in a certain way that player can, for example, control units from two factions. Of course, there is an option if somebody wants to do so. There is a database editor, and you can make your own faction with all the units you want. You can mix Soviets and NATO if you wish so. But substantially in the game, at least historically, this kind of multinational approach to operations was not really functional. I think the only exception, and it was actually not available at that time era, was like Commonwealth Division, and that's not the same thing since they speak the same language. But the kind of international cooperation on platoon or company or battalion level that we can see, for example, today, and it's not really working all that flawlessly, was not available in the Cold War. So substantially what's going to happen that you will control in combat just a single faction. So like no mixed US and German forces fighting against the Soviet horde. Okay, the chance that they will be on the same battlefield probably at a certain point would have happened, but they will be commanded by respective commanders. So the player commanding them both would be unhistorical. So that's something that we are not planning to implement. And also, for example, one of these, for example, this often comes out. For example, why we have, for example, the hostiles in Armored Brigade are always red, and the friendly units are always blue. And there was a lot of people being confused. For example, if they play Soviets, why the Soviets are blue, because they used to have the Soviets as red. And that's also because we adopted this NATO terminology in the game. So in order to have everything standardized, we have to opt to select a single system and use it for all nations, because as I said, this is actually not NATO, it's a Warsaw Pact game, because we also have Finland, which is from the start of the game for obvious reason, because the creator is from Finland. But in the, for example, in the free world database, currently it's not in the game, but we are planning to add those factions. There were nations like Yugoslavia, like Sweden. Okay, Norway was in the NATO, so there was also neutral nations. So practically we plan to add all of those factions, and all of them will be playable as any other faction without any kind of distinction. You can also play as Soviet versus Soviet, like civil war scenarios, or if you want. So also NATO against NATO. That scenario generator is quite it doesn't put any kind of limitation. There's no like red faction or the blue faction. It's every nation is practically for itself, and then you can do whatever you want. You're free to select scenarios and do it.
You mentioned a scenario generator, so the possibility of a community-driven game. How many scenarios is it kind of like unlimited? Not unlimited, but like we're talking about hundreds and thousands of scenarios that the player can get access to?
Well, they are. I mean, we have implemented the scenario feature. Currently there is a limited amount of them. Those are like canned scenarios with the text, and they're just click and play. But what is the real the real feature of the game is this skirmish generator, which we use. It allows you to select a piece of the map, and you can adjust any kind of parameter ranging from the terrain conditions to wind, visibility, morale, training, whatever you want. You can just select those parameters, select the factions, and you can generate your own map. And that's what currently gives us you can play it several times on the same piece of terrain with different factions and different factors, and it gives you unlimited possibilities to approach a scenario or tactical situation that you can create on the game. Another thing that is strictly connected to this skirmish generator is the fact that the AI is fully dynamic. Essentially, even if you play ready scenarios, it's not scripted. Each time you will notice a different tactical approach to the game. It's extremely rare that it will behave in the same way. For example, what happened to us, and this is like an anecdote, there is this, it was used on the preview of the game for the British faction, the crossing of the River Elbe. Substantially, if anybody who plays that scenario usually gets opposed by the computer on the river itself. And when I handled that scenario to the streamer, I was hoping to make that effect more or less. But what happened is that the AI decided to use a totally different strategy, like reverse defense. So he crossed the river without a shot being fired, only to get himself ambushed on the other side of the river. And I was looking the stream, and I was like, I couldn't believe it was happening on the live stream. But it can happen because the AI select a different approach each time. And so if you play that scenario for the 5 times, it's very likely that you will get totally 5 different scenarios, even if the map and the forces and everything is the same, because the AI is dynamic. And that's something, it has some positive aspects because it makes AI more adaptable. On the other hand, it also means that we don't have typical tutorial missions because we cannot really teach AI to behave as we want. I mean, of course, we can give him a set of parameters which he follows and make decisions based on current tactical decisions. So we were not able to make a real and proper tutorial unit which have, for example, a certain unit behaving the same way each time, and that's the necessary requisite for a tutorial, because we don't have any kind of scripting in the game. The AI is totally and fully dynamic, and it reacts differently, well, almost every time. There is a certain level of predictability that you can make, but it takes you, I guess, people were afraid of that, but I think it will take some well, quite some time compared to other games to actually predict how the AI is behaving. And there's also, we have implemented some unusual measures to say, which were not usually seen in the game, to actually limit this predictability of the AI. A lot of things were made on purpose to prevent player from being somehow smarter than the AI, and using a human sense of predictability to sense the danger of the AI.
In regards, I noticed one other thing that's a huge component to the game. You guys are adding an entire weather component to the game. How difficult was this feature to implement? Because many games don't implement a weather, and on top of a weather, you guys are also implementing kind of like a season kind of feature as well. Because I noticed certain maps, the trees are have leaves and such, which I'm assuming provides better cover than when it's the fall or the winter, where the trees are skin and bones, and I'm assuming it'll provide less cover.
Yes. I mean, we are actually, let's say, in a certain way, we haven't fully developed all of those features because, for example, the the weather effects, I guess we will expand them in the future and render them more common. For example, it's a rare occurrence in the game, but sometimes you can get a storm, for example, with the dark skies and thunders as well. Yes, essentially the weather is an extremely important factor in the game because it's influenced a range of factors. You can see it on the map, which is aesthetical point of view. For example, if you play in the autumn, you will see that a lot of trees don't have leaves anymore, as you said. There's the summer, of course, which is the best time to make battles. You have the winter, which the map will transform into, of course, covered by snow. It can influence rivers, for example, in the winter. If you set cold weather, the rivers can be frozen, and also the temperature influence, for example, the characteristics of the units in a certain way, because infantry can get much faster tired if they are running in the extremely high temperatures or extremely cold temperatures. There is also the chance that, for example, a vehicle can be immobilized is different for different temperatures. So if you are fighting in the desert at very high temperature or in extremely cold temperature, there is a chance that the chance that vehicle will get immobilized by maybe breaking the engine is higher in those temperatures. So yes, the weather is a very, very important factor in the game because, as I said, it influences everything from the combat to actual visual look of the game. And we are planning to actually expand, not really maybe in the core engine, but more in like visual aspects. For example, the rain. It's not model that we are planning to visually. We are hoping. I'm not promising anything, of course. One of the ideas is to actually make raindrops visible. We will see if it's technically feasible. There are some ideas and proposals that came from the beta testing that look great, but maybe can pose some kind of hardware limitations, for example. So it's something that we still need to test, but it's very, very likely that we will improve further on the weather effects, even if it's to be only mostly cosmetical. But it's still, I think, it's important for immersion in the game.
In regards to the weather, will it disrupt me from seeing my troops or controlling the troops?
No. I mean, for example, the cloud can hide your unit for a second, but no, that's something that we didn't want really to implement. I mean, the weather, as I said, and these weather effects that we are planning, one of the criteria that we all agree with is to make interaction between units and human as transparent as possible. That's one of the obstacles that, for example, we were discussing the other day, actually. We were discussing about the possible implementation of fog. And let's say that we have some of the proposals, for example, are not that good because they can make your units not that much visible to your eye physically. So we are taking that in consideration. We decided that if a weather effect is too damaging to the gameplay, detrimental to the overall gameplay of the human, then in that case, maybe, or we're gonna find another way, or we are not going to implement it, because that playability aspect is very important for us. But if your question is if it influences like the command delay or something like that, no, the weather is not influencing that because there is no really. It influences the visibility, of course. That's the only thing that it does influence, which can have very important tactical considerations, but it's not really implementing the command delay or something like that, as far as I'm aware. No.
Another thing I noticed on the website you guys listed is infiltrators under the feature. I'm assuming that's spies, and how will that be incorporated into the game?
Well, no, it's actually not. No, there's not spies. Actually, it's a small, neat feature that he implemented it. Substantially, the infiltrators are not vehicles, but exclusively infantry scout units. In the setup phase, when you're setting your battle, you can take your squad of scouts, and you can use this infiltrate command to cross on the other side of the. On the other side of the battlefield where the hostiles are. And substantially, what happens is that you have a chance of being discovered or less, depending on training of your forces. So, for example, the US faction, we have a significantly larger possibility to infiltrate than, for example, the Poles maybe, which have a lower training rating. It also depends on substantially what you're doing. You're gambling because you might select some prominent feature that you want to infiltrate. Let's say a church or a high building or a prominent hill. And it's very likely that the enemy will have the same identical idea. And since you are operating in the hostile territory, your units will likely be discovered if there are enemy units nearby. So substantially what happens is you set your scout units in the setup phase and you select the location that you want to infiltrate. And there's, of course, these parameters that you need to take care of. Another thing is also deeper you go into enemy territory, the lower the chance is that you will be successful. And once you click into action phase, then you will see the results if you succeeded into infiltrating or not. Your scout units will not die, but they can get scattered all over the map. So it's something that should be used with the parsimony. So if you are quite certain that you can infiltrate a certain location which is relatively close and you think that the enemy won't be around, then in that case you can try this infiltrate feature. And you're risking, of course. You can get a lot of benefits, of course, because that's enemy team infiltrated behind enemy lines that can give you a great amount of intelligence on enemy movements and position, but also you have to accept the risk that they may be, they can get scattered all over the map and you can substantially, I cannot say lose, but you will certainly remove them from initial phase of the game. So in that case, you will be penalized because you will lose a scout team, a scout section substantially that will not be available for some time for that reason.
You mentioned structures and houses. How will that be handled in the game? Will my soldiers be able to occupy houses, and will that give me a bonus in terms of concealment as well as additional defensive values?
Yes, you have several types of the buildings. You have everything ranging from those wooden small buildings all the way to the large industrial complexes. The system is you have several types of buildings and all of them have different parameters, different heights, different protection. You can see all of those when you are moving with the mouse across the map, and you have this small screen that give you that kind of information on what building you are having in that particular tile. And it's very important, of course, tactically. And one of the ideas that we recently got into beta testing is to actually make, possibly, if there is a large demand for that you can select on which floor your units will be. Yeah, currently they take the highest floor, but of course people were asking, and it's more maybe relevant for some older times. For example, maybe in World War II or something like that. Maybe they have much more relevance than in Cold War. So yeah, maybe we will implement that feature. That's one of the ideas that we got. But otherwise, the buildings are a very important tactical faction because, especially for the infantry, they provide you a significant cover. They can provide you with nice field of fire or visibility. They can give visibility. So it's, of course, like any other man-made feature, it can give you some advantages, especially the hardest and heaviest buildings.
You mentioned towns and cities. How big will towns or cities like Moscow, Paris, Dusseldorf, cities like this be a possibility to fight in?
Actually, there are some. There's also the southern part of the Hamburg that is already in the game.
Oh, no.
Yeah, but substantially, those kind of urban maps are very hard to fight in, which is, well, historical. And substantially, you have different densities of the buildings. Essentially, it comes down to the expertise of the map maker, how to simulate the buildings of the large cities. Substantially, currently in the game, we also have this middle two large cities that are already on the map, and you will see that, for example, the city center is usually much more dense with the larger buildings, that's like residential palaces and so on. And then you move to the suburbs and you will see the smaller houses, maybe not that tall, but and also less dense. And substantially, actually, the cities in a certain way are relatively new feature in Armored Brigade because 10 years ago they were very simple because they were map generators. So you have these large squares substantially with very rectangular streets, and it was fun to play with, but not extremely realistic. And then around 5 years ago, we decided with this idea of having just urban type terrain, which didn't have single buildings, but you only had every part of the city would be just called urban terrain, and it had its own features. And actually, you could see the tanks crossing up. I mean, from a gameplay point of view, it was significantly simpler for us to actually implement something like that. And it will also take in consideration, for example, vehicles, tanks coming into those small alleys in the cities or something like that. But aesthetically, it was not a pleasant to the eye because it was actually to be awkward. It was awkward and weird to see something like that because the city will be reduced to something similar to the field, and it was not extremely weird. And then when we started developing a commercial version, we decided to make things harder for the map players and actually play single buildings for the cities. So yes, you actually have to import the city from the map, from the satellite data, and then you can actually go around and improve the city by maybe removing a single building or placing another type of building to improve trafficability of the vehicles and actual gameplay and so on and so on.
In regards to the campaign and scenarios, how is that going to be handled? Are you guys going to have a campaign or just like a list of scenarios that the player will be able to choose from?
Unfortunately, campaign was something that we were planning for the initial release. However, eventually it turned out to be a larger endeavor that we initially expected. So it won't be in the initial release, but it will follow in the next months. The campaign will be dynamic type. We were thinking about that, how to create this campaign and how to make a maximum replayability and something that was different than the other games. And we immediately discarded this linear type of the campaign where you have, several maps that are always the same. Substantially, what we are planning is similar to, like, say, branching tree. So you start with a single battle, and depending on the result that you get, which can be a victory, draw, or defeat, you will be led on a different path. And the idea is to have incredible amount of possibilities where you will eventually end the campaign. The idea is to make this branching system, the dynamic campaign that will, each time that you will probably have a different path. Substantially, that's the idea. And also we were also thinking about not really following a single unit. The idea is, for example, it comes down to the map campaign creator that will have a lot of flexibility. For example, you can also play different faction in the same campaign. It's a possibility that you can use. Well, actually, we haven't yet finished the campaign feature, but that's the plan, substantially, that you can play with, for example, for 3 missions, you can play with the American forces. Then either you complete a victory or maybe a defeat, depending on what campaign author have intended. You can move to the Western German units, or maybe you can also play with the Americans, but the campaign will follow different units depending on, maybe you had the 3 set of defeats and your units have been depleted and you are continuing the campaign with some kind of backup forces. You have a lot of endless possibilities that you can implement in the map, and that was the idea, because as we did with the skirmish generator, that's the same that we want to do with the campaign, to maximize replayability and possibilities that the player can have, and to have a lot of content to actually be busy with. However, it also turned out to be harder than we expected in terms of work, substantially. Not that much of ideas are always too many and plenty, but implementing them, of course, can take a lot of time, and that's why, unfortunately, the campaign didn't make up into the first release. But we provided the players with some kind of scenarios, which are also there is also a scenario editor which is pretty, for the moment, is relatively simple and quite primitive, I would say, but we are planning to improve it further. So you will also have this kind of scenarios, canned scenarios, which I already mentioned previously, which are different from the campaign, and generate the scenarios in which they're always start from the same premise. And they're also similar to the scenarios that you can see in the other games, except, of course, for the fact that the AI is always answering a different way.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool. So I just have a few last questions. Is there a possibility for like naval feature coming to the game down the road?
Well, it was mentioned a few times in the past, and general consensus was no. We are not really planning naval units because this is, by all means and purposes, a land-based combat. So, of course, there are some naval units that people have been suggesting, for example, river gunboats and some kind of World War II units that technically could be there, but they will mean a lot of, especially coding parts of the units, and actually they will mean a lot of work for something that is tactically quite limited in scope and not exactly following the general combat of the game. Because, for example, even if you had those river units, you have maps where you don't have any kind of rivers or lakes. For example, there is a Fort Even National Training Center, which is a desert. So they will bring little to the game. I mean, of course, they will be interesting units and they will give some flavor, but that flavor will be quite limited in scope, limited to coastal maps or river maps, and substantially we don't see them as cost effective as a feature to be implemented in any recent times. So naval units are unlikely to see the light of the game in any kind of the recent times. So no, they're not planned at the moment.
One question I had is, what platforms are you planning to release on? Is Steam a future possibility, as well as possibly moving over to mobile or Mac?
Well, currently it's only PC, PC game. As far as the Steam is concerned, yes, it's planned, but it's more of we handle that to the Matrix. They will handle the transition to different platforms substantially. For now, it's going to be released only on the Matrix store, and on a later date, which we don't know yet, it will move to Steam. That's how we were told that things will go. As far as the porting on the other platforms, it's very unlikely that we will move on the Mac, because substantially data that we have currently, statistics show us that substantially there is a very limited amount of people playing on the Mac, and the amount of work that will be needed to make a port from. Actually, we can handle that to the third party, but it's still a lot of work to translate something which is like the Armored Brigade, which was made for Windows from the day one. And it's a big game in terms of amount of coding that was in. It is a relatively small game in terms of megabytes, for example, but in terms of program lines, it's very big. Porting all of that to Mac is something that our development team is unlikely to do, also because we don't have technical expertise to do this porting on the Mac. But the idea that to handle that with a third party, very unlikely for a serious reason, and one of them is that it's like maybe too much effort for a very limited market. We did try it in Linux and in Mac. Actually, you can use porting software on your own risk substantially, because of course we have tried that on several computers and it always worked.
Oh wow.
But of course, yeah, it's not something that of course we won't sell you the game for which of course you need to use emulators, but technically it's possible. But I haven't told you. Yeah, if you have only Mac, I'm not suggesting you to buy the game. But if you, for example, if you have Mac and Windows, in that case, I guess that there will be any kind of issues if you want to play it on the Mac, because you can use Wine and the other one, I can't remember what was the name, Overcross or something like that. We have used those emulators both on Linux and on Mac, and the game was working flawlessly. So for the time being, it can be a solution, but full-fledged porting to the Mac, at least at this point, is very unlikely. And the data that we were given, the statistics, are really not going into the favor of the Mac as a gaming platform. So yeah, it will remain PC for the time being. As far as the consoles are concerned, or maybe mobile games, also unlikely, because once you try Armored Brigade, it's pretty self-explanatory, because I think as a game, it's extremely complex to port on the mobile platforms. Maybe in the worst case, some kind of dumbed version can be played on iPad, for example. But I think that's not the way that. I mean, this is all hypothetical right now. It's not decided. It's just ideas. But we were more looking into making game actually more complex rather than making it simpler in order to port in the game on the mobile platforms. So yeah, for the time being, it will remain a PC-based platform.
Okay, awesome. I'm gonna have to try that Wine out. I dual boot my iMac, so when I was playing this game, I ran it on the Windows side, but it would be really cool to do it on the Mac side. So yeah, I'm probably gonna be doing that.
Yeah. You can try it then. In that case, it should work. And if it doesn't work, then in case I insist that you report that on the forum, so we will know.
Okay, cool. That's all the questions that I have. Is there anything that I missed or that you want to cover?
Well, yeah, I guess that's. I can't really think of any kind of particular argument that I can talk. Yes, another feature that we were planning. This is maybe the last thing that people, since like it's release day, so people are gonna play the game, and this was a highly asked for feature. Is historical order of battle that currently in the game. During the last couple of months, we have improved the auto bars, so the formations that you will see are much more accurate right now and more sensible when brought by computer. But a lot of people asked us also for historical reasons, but also for the ease of play, is to implement this kind of we call them historical orders of battle. So practically the idea is to have an additional menu in which you will be able to buy, instead of manually selecting your units in the roster. The idea is to have ready to play formations, for example, US Mechanized Battalion, Soviet Tank Regiment, or whatever, that you will be able to just buy and move immediately to the game. That's the idea, substantially. And that's something that we were planning to implement in the next hopefully 6 months or so, because it really depends on how much amount of work will be. The main issue is not that much implementing into the game from the technical point of view. it's actually relatively simple compared to the other features. It's more about research, because what people don't realize is that 27 years of transitions from different organizations, and just, for example, the US changed five major types of divisions, and all those small details that accumulate in the course of the years is mammoth amount of job. So we will see. Hopefully it should be done, but we will see how much time it will take. But the idea is to have also this historical, you just select a certain amount of, you want US tank company with all supported weapons instead of going, technically you can do it right now, but you need to go on your own and select the units you need or you want. But the idea is to have this feature that will allow you just to click one click and you can immediately go into the battle.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's going to be really cool.
Yeah, that's also one of the features that was, people are asking for that for already a couple of years, and especially in the beta, they were asking, we want that. And we will try to implement that as well other than the campaign. So hopefully we'll see that in a couple of next months.
I love you guys' commitment to the community, because I meant throughout the interview, I noticed you kept referring to the community, and basically whatever the community wants, you guys are kind of focusing on that and saying, well, the community wants this, so let's focus on that. I really appreciate that passion, that level of commitment to your fans, to your players. I can tell you, I have become one of those fans of your game, because I've played it, and I would have to say, this is a bold claim, and I know Matt's going to get on me for this, but this is the best Cold War operational game I've ever played. Between the map and the level of how the AI works, how the gameplay runs, the learning curve on this, usually games take 20, 30 minutes to pick up. This, I was able, within minutes to actually pick up and actually start playing.
Yeah, because it had this, as I said, it's we are also players, and we came from, as I said, we are not like pure developers. We are not a major gaming studio, so we were making a game that we as a players wanted to play. And so the features that you see in the games is what, us as gamers want. So substantially, that's the reason for which, as I said, that's the influence from the other games. So even if a feature is not outright copied because it's different, it has its own flavor in Armored Brigade, the basic mechanism around is probably familiar to the majority of the players. That's the reason for which a lot of players, when they start playing the Armored Brigade for the first time, they usually get quite familiar from the start. Now you have some advanced features that maybe are not immediately understandable and or maybe are unique to the Armored Brigade, but after some time you start learning them. But the basic mechanism of the game is very simple and very understandable. And as far as the community is concerned, yes, because I said we started as a community. I was the part of the player base, I was the fan, and then I became a developer. And I think when I joined the game, there were 4 factions. I added there were 11, so 7 additional factions when it was freeware, and then I became a developer. So it's all natural for us, and of course we follow what community wants, because that was what make this game really great, because most of the features that you see in the game come from the feedback from the players. A lot of things were suggested over the years. A lot of those were implemented. Unfortunately, many were not implemented either because they were too overly ambitious or maybe too personalized. We are not really implementing every single feature that players want. Sometimes you need to, think about something, and then you realize, well, it would be a cool idea, but maybe it's not the smartest decision to implement. For example, something that is not in the game, for example, is you cannot see the tracers of unidentified enemy units. And this is a lesson we took from the close combat, because in the close combat, for example, the human player, when playing against a computer, he can actually cheat by seeing the tracers of enemy units. And even if you're not identifying that there is enemy squad, you can see the tracers, and you can use direct fire to actually eliminate that squad before even seeing them, which is cheating compared to, and it's not fair to the AI who doesn't have the same capability to use against the players. So that's one of the pillars of this game, is we are not using features that are not usable by AI. We don't want to give human player any kind of advantage. And that's actually true also for the AI, because in this game, the player and the AI are on the same plane. So you don't have any kind of cheating by AI. He doesn't know where your units are. He doesn't have any kind of, so the same screen that you are seeing as a human player, that's the same kind of information that the AI is having, because that's one of the cardinal rules of the game. And as I said, a lot of things were suggested over the course by the community, but we decided not to implement them, because although they might look fancy and cool, and I'm thinking maybe in this case maybe something like bridge laying units or something like that. Yes, but since the AI cannot use them, we decided for the time being that those features are not going to be implemented until we teach AI to use them. And in that case, we will implement them. And yeah, that's actually something that Juha in particular is very good at, because also in development team, you have three of us who are very usually tend to get over enthusiastic over a certain aspect. For example, somebody suggests something and we are all, yeah, we want to see that in the game. It's an awesome feature. And then you have Juha, who is more of the wise man, who will say, maybe he will give some arguments, and you say, okay, that's actually a good point. And so, yeah, it's kind of balancing factor to sometimes developers also need to counterweight certain wishes that are maybe unrealistic in the game.
I'm very impressed. I'm very motivated and very excited for this game and the future of this series here that you guys have, because from what I'm getting from you is that it's going to be a never-ending development process. You guys are always going to constantly refining this game.
Yes. I mean, that was what we were doing that for the last 10 years, and we will continue doing that we are hoping for many other years to do. And yeah, it's also because community is constantly changing. There's also the thing that sometimes you do a single feature, something like highly asked feature, and people are asking for that. We only want that, and we only want that single thing, and then you give them that feature, and then all of a sudden there are like 10 other features that they want as well. So continuously having to develop things, and also many aspects of the game need to be improved, and particularly this is also important why the community for us is important, because being a military simulator in a certain way, what meant to us a lot was the input that was put by the former people who were actually in the army and operated those systems. For us, it was of vital importance to know those things, because, as I said, none of us, we all come from different backgrounds. And for example, for me, yeah, I can read manuals of a tank or artillery operations, but translating that in the game is not an easy task. So having somebody who actually plays the game and actually served in, for example, let's say artillery or helicopters or whatever, who can say well, this is how we did that. And the manual, it says in a certain way, but it was done in this way. And this parts that you maybe not understand because it's too complex, because, being operating a complex system is not something that you learn in 2 days. It means a lot to have somebody who actually suggests you. And a lot of features in this game, actually, the vast majority was based on the input from former servicemen who gave us the input. However, there are some new features, for example, the radars. That came to my mind, but there are other aspects of the game that we recently added that will certainly need some kind of feedback from the community and the former operators, because that's the best way actually to improve the game and make it as realistic as possible.
That's awesome. That's all the questions that I have. Is there any other things that you wanted to add in?
No, that would be, I guess, all. Okay. I already, yeah.
All right, I appreciate you coming on the show. I recommend this game to anybody listening. Like I said, this is for me the best Cold War game I've ever played. So thank you for developing this game. It's incredible. I appreciate all your work, and thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for hosting us and giving us the possibility to talk. So yeah, we also appreciate that as much, and especially if you're a fan of the game, that's absolutely thank you.
I appreciate it, Nikola, and hopefully I'll be able to speak to you in the future.
Yeah, let's hope we'll be in the contact and see you probably on the forum or something like that.
All right, sounds good. I hopefully maybe like be able, once you add in maybe the campaign mode, I can get you back on the show and talk a little bit more about that.
Yes, hopefully in the next few months. I'm not giving the timetables, but that's the idea. In the next 6 months, there are several of those major features that we are planning to implement in the game. So we still need to understand how we're going to implement them as final, expansion or patches or something like that. We will see. But certainly the big things are still yet to come in the next at least 6 months. And after that, we will make further plans based also on how the games actually sells. It's actually a success. We are hoping, but I don't want to bring bad luck for the time being. So yeah, we will see today. Maybe today is the opening day, and the next coming days we will see if the people like the game or not. We'll see that the initial feedback that we had up to this point was positive, and we will see how the rest of the players will react. So let's hope for the best.
Okay, awesome. I wish you guys all the luck. I don't think you'll need it, but
it's never enough. It's always a good thing to have around.
Yeah. All right, Nikola. Thank you for coming on the show, and thank you guys for joining. And hopefully, you guys enjoyed the interview. I know I did, and we'll catch you guys in the next episode.